Hey there, demons. It's me, your girl, back again with yet another speed paint, only this time I thought I'd mix it up a bit. As you can see, the subject for today is my version of Sonic.exe from City of Evil, my comic. You guys should check it out. But while the paint is going on, I'm going to be doing a bit of a review of the official Sonic.exe remake. Yeah, there are dozens upon dozens of reviews of the original, yet I could only really find one of the remake. It's bad creepypastas. They're a great channel, but I shouldn't have to tell you considering their subscriber dick is way bigger than mine. While it is disappointing to see barely anything on this, it's understandable considering just how long this thing actually is. That, along with the fact that it's a slog to get through, is one of its main issues. Seriously, JC the Hyena may as well change his name to Maxie, because all he does is pad. But I digress. Let's get to the synopsis. The story starts off with a prologue. I think it's trying to set the mood and tone of the story, but it's mostly just pointless, meandering navel-gazing. I think it's trying to invoke the idea of cosmic horror, but it mostly just comes off as padding in a story that already feels like it's made of padding. So, Chapter 1, and the for real start of the story. We are introduced to protagonist Ken Tom. We also learn that, like in the original, Tom has a friend named Kyle, whom he hasn't heard from in a while. 3 weeks to be exact. After making another failed attempt to contact him, he resolves to check on his dorm the next day. Okay, you see how few words I managed to explain that in? You want to know how long it takes for the actual story to sum this up? Half the goddamn chapter. And the worst part is, it barely even uses this word vomit for anything. We get character description and bare minimum personality description. But the rest again feels like padding. The entire thing is like this. So let's get on to the other half of the chapter. Next day, Tom goes to meet Kyle. He knocks on the door but gets no answer, so he goes back to his own dorm. Upon getting there, he finds a package with a note attached to it in front of his door. Tom reads the note and finds that, much to his surprise, it's from Kyle. Now, I will give praise where it's due. This time around, the letter isn't a desperate plea for Tom to destroy the disc, which is promptly ignored, but instead a letter praising the game and encouraging Tom to play it. This does make this version of Tom slightly less of a dumbass, but only slightly. Tom is naturally pissed that this is the only communication he receives after a month of being ghosted, and decides to blow off some steam in the shower before he's tempted to chug a 2-liter of Mountain Dew and punch a hole in his wall. The story doesn't actually put it that way, but I figured I'd throw it in because I'm bored already. We aren't even done with the first chapter, people. So after a somewhat uncomfortably long scene in the shower, where we are told things instead of shown, we transition to the next day. Tom gets a knock at the door, to which one Derek Green from Round 2 answers. Given that Green is a cop, this ends up confirming what was obvious to us as the audience, that Kyle is in fact dead. Okay, that's the end of Chapter 1. Now on to the second chapter. We are now at the police station with Tom and Derek. There isn't too much to say about this sequence, just that Chelsea's name has been changed to Sarah, and she's apparently wearing one of the worst fashion ensembles I've ever heard described. Seriously, hot pink is the absolute worst color for a vest. And you're going to pair that with a white shirt? Are you trying to make people's eyes bleed? But I digress. We learn that Tom isn't a suspect, and that Green apparently has never heard of things being on a need-to-know basis, as he tells Tom that Kyle's murder is likely one of several others, and shows him several graphic crime scene photos. Like, seriously, I know the pigs let a lot of shit slide, but I'm pretty sure they'll fire you for this. Regardless, we cut to a week later. We are introduced to 3 more characters. They don't matter and are just there as padding for the body count. There's a jock, what I assume is supposed to be the comic relief character, but is just annoying, and the jock's girlfriend, whose only personality trait, aside from liking the Archie Sonic comics, is girl! I'm calling them Meathead, Polly Shore, and Token Female, respectively. It's also here we learn that JC the hyena cannot write dialogue to save his life. Every piece comes off like it was written by an alien whose only interaction with humans is outdated TV shows from the 90s. So after a chat with the Bargain Bin Losers Club, Tom decides to jack his dead friend's PC. Deadass dude just yoinks it right out of his room. For what reason? Well, it's a Chekhov's gun. You'll see it'll be important for later. Nothing else of note happens in this chapter, so we go on to chapter 3. It's the next day, and we finally get to the video game that this video game creepypasta is about. Yeah, but you guys forgot that this story was even about a fucking Sonic ROM hack, didn't you? Tom installs the game, and it's gonna take a while, so he decides to watch a movie. Now, you may think this is filler, 'cause it is, but I wanted to make note of it because of the choice of film. It's The Dark Knight, and I think this was JC's attempt to draw parallels between his piece of trash story and a decent, if somewhat over-quoted film, which is pretty laughable, all things considered. That and I wanted to point out that JC's probably one of those assholes who unironically identifies with the Joker and quotes him incessantly. So the movie gets to the part where the Joker's like, "You drink water, I drink anarchy," when the game finishes downloading. After putzing around for about a minute, Tom goes to play it. So finally, we get to the game. This one opts to skip the cringy, hyper-realistic, blood-covered title of the original and get to the character selection. Tom decides to select Silver because he's a fucking 06 apologist and should never be forgiven for it. Regardless, one Kefka laugh later, and the first sequence of the game starts. Hide and seek. The game is in 3D this time around, and much to Tom's surprise, he's playing as Tails. This sequence is set in an abandoned city with nary an NPC to be found. Tom finds this creepy, but to me it just seems like one of those shovelware games you buy on Steam. You know, the ones that cost like $1 and are probably trying to mine your PC. Let's hope this version of X isn't into crypto. So Tom wanders aimlessly for a bit before running into this story's version of X. Now, how do I describe the remake version of X? Well, he's definitely creepy, but not in the way the author intended. Or maybe he did, considering the type of person he is. This isn't the type of creepy that invokes dread. No, this is the creepy that you're pretty sure should be on a list and not allowed near schools or playgrounds, if you catch my drift. Personality-wise, well, you know Pennywise from the 2017 It movie? Yeah, he's pretty much cheap knockoff Pennywise, which makes a lot of sense, considering this whole story is knockoff It. I'm gonna call him Nickel Smart. Unfortunately for Tom, him running into Nickel Smart is what triggers the fail state, and Nickel Smart goes into sickle mode to chase down Tails. Tom makes Tails run, but unfortunately the scheme is using the alien geometry trope, and he finds himself in a burning forest. Now, one of my chief complaints with the original is that it cut to black whenever any actual gore was about to happen. This wouldn't be a problem if not for the fact that the original liked to sell itself as this too gory for an R-rating splatterfest, when really it was too pussy to actually commit to the shit that would even earn you a PG-13. I mean, yeah, it had plenty of blood in it, but the blood sort of loses its impact if it's there for decoration. The remake tries to amend this by actually showing the kills, but unfortunately they aren't very satisfying nor original. Like, this one with Tails is probably the best it gets, and I'm pretty sure most of it is stolen from the Silent Hill movie. So, this sequence is over, and just like the original, Tom is way more scared of this shit than he really should be. Like, yeah, I know he just saw some gore, but it was from a fucking video game. You're a college student in your second year, so I assume at the youngest you're 19. Unless you were sheltered as all fuck, you grew up in the age of the internet where you could deadass see real dead bodies if you knew where to look. My point being, you should not be this sensitive to game graphics. Granted, the lore to this makes it creepy, but Tom is not aware of said lore, so his reaction still doesn't make any sense. Regardless, Tails is dead, and Tom's pansy ass turns off his computer and decides to go to bed. Chapter 4. Next day, and we're back to Tom and the cannon fodder talking the way no adult human talks. Token females' dialogue in particular is especially annoying. Oh, blood is icky. Aren't the Archie comics great? Let me tell you about my ships. Like, seriously, the way she talks, you'd think JC never spoke to any woman with a mental maturity past 12. And considering the kind of person he is, that probably isn't too far off. Luckily, this conversation is cut short by murder before my patience is tested any further. Another future victim runs into the cafeteria to inform everyone that the body count has risen. And for some weird reason, JC felt the need to point out the janitor is Japanese. I don't know why he did this either. No other character's ethnicity is pointed out, just this guy's. Regardless, we got another post-human. Tom feels the best course of action is to call the worst cop ever Derek Green. We get to the crime scene, and we're introduced to a complainer is always wrong type of character, Officer Craven, who rightfully points out that, no Derek, you can't bring some random civilian into an active crime scene. But of course he's disagreeing with JC's super special awesome Mary Sue detective character, so he's portrayed as a dick. Derek's like, fuck you, Craven, I can break whatever law I want. I probably got my job through nepotism considering my sister is also working with me, so they ain't gonna fire my ass for shit. And Craven is never seen in the story again. Hashtag justice for Craven, everybody. But either way, it's the same MO as Kyle's murder, so yeah, we got a serial killer on our hand. So there's an assembly to tell people about all the slasher movie bullshit going on. I'm skimming over it because it doesn't tell us anything we don't already know. Next scene, Tom and his satellites are talking again. Their dialogue is as inane as ever, but with a healthy dose of explaining how super special awesome Tom is this time around. Either way, they decide to break into the anime club to play the game on the projector. Chapter 5, and we're past the halfway mark, people. They hook up the PC to the projector and start the game. Next sequence starts, but unfortunately we also have to hear commentary from the peanut gallery along with this one. This section is in a hallway and the player character is Sally Acorn. Tom makes Sally wander around till he finds Fiona from the Archie comics suspended by hooks in a very creepily described state. She begs for help, but like an asshole, Tom just opts to leave her there. Our protagonists, ladies and gentlemen. They at first end up in an MC Escher room while exploring, and then they're suddenly back in the city. One Kafka laugh later, and Bitch Boy is on his way. At this point, the story decides to fully rip off It 2017 by copying the projector scene from that movie almost verbatim, only with the added annoyance of the shit-stained squad never shutting the fuck up. Also, I think Pauly Shore makes a Chris Chan reference at one point, so that's a thing. After Nickel Smart spouts off one of his catchphrases from the original, Tom finally has a sense in him to turn off the PC, and Nickel Smart is sent back to the Shadow Realm. So after questioning whether or not it's a good idea to keep eating those mushrooms they find in the cow patties, these shitheads decide to head off to bed. Next day, Tom goes to the library to do some research. JC decides to do some light ego stroking by having Tom be a fan of the books of one Jack Cranley, aka JC's persona's full name. It's funny he thinks work like this is print-worthy when it reads like it was written by a child struggling to pass English class. But what would I know? I've only gotten one book published as opposed to JC's 0. But I dislike bragging, so back to the story. Tom looks up some shit, finds out about Nickel Smart's cult, reads some pseudoscientific bullshit, aka the 21 grams experiment, and takes it to heart because remember, he's an idiot. He probably believes in the flat earth too. But before he can read more, Monokuma announces that yet another body has been discovered. Chapter 6, I stand corrected, it's actually 3 this time. But it's not like it matters, these fucks don't even get names. Naturally, everybody freaking the fuck out. There's now a curfew and people are encouraged to use the buddy system, yada yada, it doesn't matter, they're all fucking cannon fodder that I couldn't get less of a shit about if I tried. Tom decides to call up Green and give him his pseudoscientific bullshit theories. And like the fucking idiot it is, Derek shares information with a civilian that should be strictly confidential, because no one in this story has two brain cells to rub together. Either way, after his phone call, Tom goes to the Cannon father to tell them that the killer is a Sonic recolor. They agree with him without question, because Tom is a Mary Sue and no one is allowed to disagree with him. Anyway, token female, who I didn't even notice was missing from the group because she's that forgettable, runs in to tell us that a character that was never mentioned before is missing. So, while looking for out-of-nowhere character, Meathead suddenly gains some semblance of being something other than a satellite for JC's super special awesome self-insert, and starts to mention how stupid the idea of people getting killed by a Sonic recolor is. And as per the laws of bad fanfiction, he is immediately punished for disagreeing with the Mary Sue by being proven wrong, cause Nickel Smart is here. Chapter 7. Nickel Smart scares the little bitch brigade by letting off a Kefka laugh. They try countering by yelling at him. This is exactly as effective as you think. They're like, fuck you, Nickel Smart, why you killing all these bitches? And Nickel Smart is like, lol, I didn't kill shit. I just did something that made them stop functioning on a biological level. And they're like, that's literally the definition of killing someone. And Nick is like, whatever, you know that character that wasn't mentioned till now and the audience has no attachment to? Well, I'm a killer now. And he does. Our mains decide to run, but in a rare display of unselfish behavior from these characters, they decide to warn the rest of the school via the intercom first. Unfortunately for them, Nikki's cult has somehow managed to barricade the building. Tom tries to call Green, and unless Green is coming in with heavy fucking artillery, I don't think he's going to be all that effective. Alas, the cult seems to be using a signal jammer as well, so no one is able to get their cell phones to work. Nickel Smart comes out to start the massacre. He goes for token female first, but Meathead, continuing the streak of being the character I want to strangle the least, jumps in front of her to take the brunt of his attack. Tom calls him an idiot for this because he's awful. Regardless, this buys the others some time to run. Not very much, however, as these characters all have the self-preservation instincts of happy tree friends, as we will soon see. Tom and Polly Shore make it to the cafeteria. The token female can't make it before the doors close, and she gets smirked next. All while crying like a little bitch, of course. We can't have the only major female character die with any dignity after all. That's out of line in a JC production. Tom and Polly Shore quickly run into the food storage of the kitchen and decide to hide out there. So Tom is alone with Polly Shore. Jesus, if that were me, I'd probably just let Nickel Smart kill me at that point. Either way, they decide to wait out the massacre till morning. Chapter 8. Tom is woken up from his little nap by his phone ringing, meaning the jammer is apparently off now. It's Green. Tom informs him of the sheer fuckery going around and begs Green to get him out of there. Green is like, aight, and hangs up. Tom looks for Polly Shore only to find him dead as well, meaning Tom is likely the heaviest sleeper on the planet, given he slept through what was likely a pretty gruesome death. That, and he's the only one alive. Tom takes exception to there being no more meat shields for him to hide behind, and goes to his room to Tyson the shit out of his laptop. This, however, is all for naught, as Kyle's Chekhov gun's laptop is done charging. And this is where the story really goes off the rails. Kyle starts speaking to Tom from Nickel Smart's dimension in the form of Knuckles the Echidna. No, I'm not joking, and the story wants us to see this as a serious emotional moment too. A competent story may have been able to make something like this emotional, but this story does absolutely nothing to prepare you for the idea that something like this has even the possibility of happening in this universe, as it's been so intent on grounding itself in what JC thinks reality is, that something like this comes right the fuck out of nowhere. As such, my, and I assume the audience's reaction, is just laughter as a result. The world's most unintentionally hilarious Zoom call ends and Nickel Smart comes out of the computer to kill Tom. He corners Tom and it's really uncomfortable, as an icky bad touch uncomfortable. Like, I want to say how this came off was unintentional, but considering the kind of person JC is, I have my doubts. Tom manages to get away from Nikki and grab a knife. He threatens off himself to get what he wants, which, if I'm honest, seems a bit irresponsible to write when you know your audience is composed of teenagers. Tom ends up doing it, Nickel Smart lets out a Darth Vader no, and the chapter ends. Last fucking chapter of this shit show. Green and the rest of the pigs show up to a college full of dead people. Tom's offing was for nothing as Nickel Smart got his soul anyway. Green decides to get wasted and contemplates quitting his job. He really should, he's not very good at it. But no, his atrociously dressed sister convinces him otherwise, and the story ends with sequel baiting. Jesus, pole dancing Christ, that shit was fucking long! Okay, so now we get to my overall thoughts. This thing has no business being as long as it is. I abridged a lot of it for the synopsis, and it was still a slog. The length isn't even justified as it's filled to the brim with nothing. No personality, no information about the world this takes place in, just a whole lot of nothing. The characters suffer from the same issue. They have only the vaguest suggestions of personalities, and what little they do shows them to be vapid, shallow, self-serving, and downright stupid people, more concerned about the gossip around their campus than the blatant murders going on. With the exception of Meathead, none of these characters have any fight in them. Their response to anything vaguely spooky is either run away or whine petulantly at it. Not even a hint of resourcefulness in them whatsoever. They just feel like they're there to be victims and nothing else. Character writing like this may be somewhat acceptable if the characters in question were super young. I'm talking 5 to 10 years old, not for fully grown adults in college. And that brings us to our antagonist. Good lord, he was bland in the original, but in this one, he's bland and feels like he needs to be on a sex offenders registry. He has zero presence as a threat, let alone a villain, and he only succeeds in his plans because he's a villain Sue, and the rest of the cast could be outsmarted by a rock. The Sonic.exe remake's worst sin, however, is the fact that it's boring. A story can be bad but still entertaining. This isn't even entertainingly bad, it's just bad. Even with the ever so slightly improved grammar, I'd say the remake is worse than the original. I don't recommend it, not even for laughs. So, with all this negativity, you might be wondering, is there a horror fanfiction series of a popular franchise featuring anthro animals that has a primary antagonist with black and white eyes whose name starts with an X that's any good? Well, that's a weirdly specific criteria, but you are correct. Join me next time as I review Happy Tree Friends Amnesia. See you next time, guys. Bye-bye.